Okay, so forget the numbers.
Okay, it's
Okay,
recording. Okay.
okay. Um, Today is the Yahrzeit of my uncle Zatzal, the Rav, the Gaon Rabbi Yosef Dov Halevi Soloveichik, the greatest teacher of our generation, Torah teacher. Um, and I will, in discussing the Hallel, I'm going to be discussing Hallel about Pesach, about Chalamoed. I will use the thoughts that I express to make mention of one of the attributes of my uncle. I mean, to speak about my uncle in totality is something that would be impossible. But each time we could emphasize one point, and I want to use this opportunity on his Yahrzeit. Matter of fact, I think it's important and to stress that most teachers, you know, teach teachers with their students, most of the time, when the student finishes the course, the lesson, the shir, and he goes on in life, uh, the teacher becomes less significant, plays a more minor role in his life. And but there are certain teachers, and my uncle is the prime example of that, that I would say even after he passed away, but he's constantly becoming greater and greater as a teacher. People are constantly learning from his shiurim and from the hashkafas that he expressed. Now, Pesach, the first 2 days of Pesach, or the first day of Pesach in Eretz Yisrael, so we say whole hollow. But when the rest of Pesach, we only say half hollow. For some reason, the second half of Pesach is not identified with the mitzvah of hollow the same way the first day of Pesach. And that is to be distinguished from Sukkot. Because we we say all hollow. We say all hollow every day. We say all hollow every day, even on the Chalamoet. So the question is, why is it that Pesach, and this is a question that the Gemara raises, why is it that Pesach, except for the first Yom Tov or Yom Tovin, depending if you are in Eretz Yisrael or you are or you are in Chutz La'aretz, so we say Holal, but Yom Chalamoed and the last days or last day we say only half Holal. Why is it that way? And the Gemara says the reason is because if we look at the Karbanos, the Karban Musaf, each day of Yontif, each day of the Pesach, the same carbon, the same Musaf carbon was given each day. However, when you look at the holiday of Sukkot, so each day there's a different carbon. Consequently, on Sukkot, in a certain form, in a certain shape, each day is like a separate holiday, a new different holiday. Whereas Pesach, each day is the same holiday. It's interesting that Reb Chaim, I saw it brought down in the name of Reb Chaim that if somebody forgot or for some reason couldn't say Hallel the first 2 days of Pesach, so let's say on the third day he says Hallel, so he should say whole Hallel, because Pesach, the holiday of Pesach, requires a whole Hallel, but a whole Hallel is not repeated. But in any case, the reason the Gemara says that Pesach is not identified with Hallel in the same manner that we should say whole Hallel every day as we do by Sukkot, is because on Pesach the korban, the sacrifice of each day, was the same sacrifice. It didn't change from one day of Pesach to the second day of Pesach to the third day of Pesach. Each day you gave the same sacrifice. However, and on Sukkot, each day was a different sacrifice. Constantly we say Hallel whole Hallel each day. Now, however, Rishonim, I think the Avudraham, they give another explanation. And I shouldn't say another explanation, but an additional explanation. And they mention the Medrash. The Medrash says that the Medrash tells us that the Medrash says that the Malachim, the angels in heaven, that at the time after Kriyas Yamsuf, when the Jewish people were singing Das Yashir, was singing the song of praise to God, of thanking God for saving them. So the angels also wanted to join the Jewish people in saying Das Yashir, or in singing Shira, in singing a song of thanks to God and praise to God. And God turned to them, the Medrash says, and said, Ma'aseh Yadai Tovim Bayam. Human beings are drowning. Now the truth is, those who were drowning were Rishayim. They were potential murderers of the Jewish people. But V'atem Omrim Shira. So when people are drowning, human beings are drowning. So you sing a song of praise. Oh, the question is very often asked, okay, so how is it that the Jewish people sang Das Yashir? And Reb Chaim Volozhiner said something, and I think although this is not the focus of what I'm going to talk about, but in view of the events that are taking place today, and the foolish comments that some Jews, even rabbis, are making, and foolish comments that people who write books sometimes make, it's important to be aware of the pshat that Reb Chaim Volozhiner said. How is it that the Jewish people said Das Yashir? Why, what HaKadosh Baruch Hu, what God said to the Malachim? Ma'aseh Yadai Tovim B'yam V'atem Omrim Shira. Human beings are drowning. Yes, they were wicked. They were murderers. They wanted to kill the Jewish people. But how could you, Malachim, sing Shira? It should be a sad event for you. Human beings were created with great potential. And unfortunately, sometimes they don't even live in a positive way. They don't use their potential for positive things. And consequently, that necessitates their death. Reb Chaim Volozhin said that there was once in a certain town, he gave a marshal, and that didn't necessarily happen. There was a person who used to, at that time, we know, the government was very anti-Semitic. Like some of the government officials that we have today. Okay, they don't have the ability to do the harm at this point that the government officials in those days had. But there was a certain individual who would cooperate in his town with the government officials. And he caused many Jews to be killed in the town. And then something happened, and he was killed. And the people of the town were finally able to breathe. They were finally able to live. And they rejoiced. And the people in the next town heard about it. And they also rejoiced. And the people from the first town sent them a message. We were saved. We have to rejoice. But you, in that particular situation, unfortunately, that's not the situation that we find today, as the events of the last 2 years have demonstrated. Events of the last 2 years demonstrated that when there is anti-Semitism in one town, when there's one anti-Semitism in one block, it spreads. So, but you did not have a salvation. You had no problem from the very beginning. Why should you rejoice? The Jewish people rejoiced because their lives were saved. But the Malachim, they weren't in danger. And certainly what overtook the Jewish people, the danger that had originally overtaken the Jewish people would certainly not been a possibility to overtake the Malachim. So God said to them, why should you rejoice? That which I created with my hands, that's of course an expression. The human beings who I created are drowning. Why do you say Shira? But for the Jewish people, it was a reason to sing Shira. And I think, so the Mefarshim say that so when we give thanks or speak of the greatness of God, because of his salvation, that because of a salvation that saved our lives. So there is a certain limitation. Of course, we have to say, Shira, we were saved. But, and certainly at the point when it happened, when it's primarily thanking God, but as praise, there's a certain limitation. In future years, it's no longer giving thanks. In future years, it's just giving praise to God. Pesach at night, we're considered that we're there at the time of the miracle itself. So Pesach at night, we have an extended Hallel. But when we say Hallel in the future years, there we already said at the time of the event, we gave thanks to God. It's on the anniversary of the event. On the anniversary event, there has to be a limitation on the Hallel that we say. So because of that, the Avudram and some other Rishonim, they say that's why Pesach, Chol Hamoed in the last days, we don't say whole Hallel. We only say half Hallel. We place a limitation because the last day of Pesach, that was the day when the Egyptians drowned. That's the day that they said the Hallel in the morning. They said the Shira in the morning. But so we on the anniversary of that event, at the time that the event took place, we had to express our joy. We had to express our happiness. We were saved. But in future years, there has to be a limitation. And because there has to be a limitation, we only say half Hallel. So this is the explanation that some of the Rishonim give. Why on Chol Hamoed and on the last day of Pesach, we only say half Hallel. So the question is, the Gemara already gave a reason, and the Rishonim bring down that reason. The reason is because each day was a separate korban, a separate sacrifice. Why did Rishonim have to give an additional reason? Each day was the same sacrifice. Meaning the same sacrifice, it was a repeat of the same holiday, or it was the same holiday. So why did they have to give an additional reason? Because of those that died at the Egyptians who died at the time of Kriyas Yamsuf. So we place certain limitations on the Hallel. We only say half Hallel. Now, I was once, many, many years ago, as a young boy, and from time to time, on occasion, I used to go on Tuesday night when my uncle would give a shiur. My memory serves me correctly, and he dealt with that question. And if I recall correctly, what he suggested was that there are two reasons on a holiday why we have to say Hallel. One reason that we have to say the Hallel, the praise of God on the holiday, is because it's a holiday, a day dedicated to service to God. And a day that's dedicated to service to God requires a special prayer of praise of God. But then there's another reason. When that holiday commemorates a miracle, we say the Hallel. We say the Hallel in order to give praise of God for the miracle that he brought upon the Jewish people. So at the Gemara's reason that we don't say whole Hallel, or that we don't say Hallel, that we don't say whole Hallel on Pesach and the last days and Chol Hamoed, that reason is a reason for us not to say, or to say only part Hallel, from the perspective of the significance of the day. In other words, it's just a repeat of the same holiday as yesterday. And I said Hallel yesterday. I said whole Hallel yesterday. And when I said the whole Hallel the previous day or the first day, to a certain degree, since it's all the days are the same holiday, that Hallel was on all the days. But the facts are that that same holiday repeats itself day after day after day. So we say another Hallel. We say another Hallel. But the Hallel is said in a shortened form. We say half Hallel. But then there's another reason why we should say Hallel. And the reason we should say the Hallel, my impression is, my uncle said, was because of the miracle that took place, because of the Yetzias Mitzrayim, because of the Exodus from Egypt. Because the day commemorates, all 7 days commemorate the Exodus from Egypt. So when we reach these days, each day, in a sense, reminds us of the miracle. And each day reminds us the miracle anew, even though yesterday was also that way. So perhaps we should say all Hallel because of the miracle, not because of the day. So because of that, the Rishonim come and say, no. Yes, in theory, we should have said whole Hallel because of the miracle. But since on the 7th day, human beings were drowned, it was necessary. They were murderers. They wanted to kill the Jewish people. So there is a limitation on the Hallel that we say. And I was troubled. Okay, that explains very well why on the last day of Pesach we should only say half Hallel. Because on the last day of Pesach, the Jewish people, on the last day of Pesach, the Jewish people were saved because of Kriyas Yamsuf, because of the splitting of the sea. And the Egyptians who were running after them, and had the Egyptians survived, had the Egyptians had the horses and the chariots remained in the possession of the Egyptian people, they would have come after them. So as a result of the splitting of the sea and the waters returning to the way they were originally, drowning the Egyptians, the Jewish people were saved. But nevertheless, people drowned. But that was true all on the 7th day. But because it's a celebration of Yetzias Mitzrayim, the whole holiday of Pesach reminds us about the Exodus from Egypt. So if the whole holiday of Pesach reminds us about the exodus from Egypt, so why is it that in Chol Hamoed we only say half Hol? On the last day, we should only say half Hol. And I think now there is a whole dispute on Chol Hamoed whether to put tefillin on or not to put tefillin on. Sfardim, Hasidim, and now, because of the opinion of Vilna Gaon, the custom in Eretz Yisrael, which has, in a sense, Eretz Yisrael has influenced the Ashkenazic communities even outside Eretz Yisrael. So there are many who don't put tefillin on Chol Hamoed. But the Ashkenazic custom, and the custom of the Misnagdim in prior years, and there's still that many do that, was to put tefillin on Chol Hamoed. And there's a machlokas rishonim about it. The Ramah says to say, to put tefillin on. The Mechaber says not to put tefillin on. The Vilna Gaon says not to put tefillin on. And the question, what is this question dependent upon? So the way the Beis Yosef explains it is like this. Why is it prohibited to put tefillin on Yontif? The answer is Yontif, tefillin is prohibited because Yontif is an os. It's a sign. The question is, it's a sign about the special relationship between God and the Jewish people. But what is the os of Yontif? What is that sign of Yontif? Is the sign the prohibition to do work? Yontif, after all, it's not all the malachas are asur like on Shabbos. Ochel nefesh, cooking under most circumstances is permitted on Yontif. Shabbos, of course, it's prohibited. But for the most part, Yontif is a day that malacha is prohibited. So is that the sign? Or, in the words of the Beis Yosef, is the mitzvos of the day the sign? The matzah, the sign. The prohibition of eating chametz, the sign. Or is it the fact that the melacha is prohibited, the sign? Now, if we say that it's the mitzvos of the day that is the sign of the special relationship, that is identified as the sign of the special relationship that exists between God and the Jewish people, that the halacha identifies. So we would say that Chol Hamoed you shouldn't put on tefillin. In other words, because if the day itself is a sign and tefillin is a sign, so you don't put one sign on another sign. So if the day is a sign of the special relationship, you don't put on tefillin, which is also a sign. So if the sign of Yontif is the mitzvahs of the day, we know. The mitzvahs, maybe not in the exact same way, but in similar ways, the mitzvahs of Yontif apply in Chol Hamoed. One only eats matzah, according to some opinions. There's even a special mitzvah in eating matzah in the other days. And there's certainly a prohibition of eating chametz. That would mean that not just Yontif is a sign, but Chol Hamoed is also a sign. Consequently, you wouldn't put tefillin on Chol Hamoed. Whereas the Shita, the opinion that says that there's another opinion that says the sign is not the mitzvahs of the day, but the sign is the prohibition of doing work. In which case, now there are certain forms of work that are prohibited on Chol Hamoed, not as many as on Yontif. But nevertheless, there are forms of work that are prohibited on Chol Hamoed. One, just as an example, under normal circumstances, these are just examples. There's many, many, many more examples. One is not allowed to take a haircut on Chol Hamoed. One's not allowed to cut their hair on Chol Hamoed. And there are many, many other examples. I'm just taking the simplest example possible. So if the sign is the prohibition to do work, then it would depend. If the prohibition of doing work on Chol Hamoed is a biblical prohibition, an Isur D'Oraisa, then you wouldn't be able to put tefillin on Chol Hamoed. Because Chol Hamoed is a sign. But if the prohibition of doing work, let's say taking a haircut on Chol Hamoed, if the prohibition of taking a haircut on Chol Hamoed is only rabbinic, so from the perspective of the Torah, the sign isn't applicable to Chol Hamoed. So consequently, you would put tefillin on Chol Hamoed. And the Mishkenes Yaakov, Rabbi Yaakov Karlina, he was considered the outstanding student of Reb Chaim Volozhiner. So in his Sefer Mishkenes Yaakov, he asks a question. He says, we find the number of Rishonim, and he specifies Rashi. Rashi, on one hand, is of the opinion, but there are other Rishonim that he says hold the same way. Rashi, on one hand, is of the opinion that work in Chol Hamoed, those types of work that are prohibited in Chol Hamoed, are biblically prohibited. On the other hand, Rashi's of the opinion that we put tefillin on the Chol Hamoed. So the question is, how could Rashi and the Rishonim will hold like him? That we put tefillin on Chol Hamoed, at the same time say that melacha, that work in Chol Hamoed, is prohibited biblically. If work is prohibited biblically, so Chol Hamoed is a sign. And if it's the mitzvos that is the sign, Chol Hamoed also has the mitzvos. Chol Hamoed has there's, according to some, there's a mitzvah of matzah. Certainly there's a prohibition of chametz. On Sukkot and Chol Hamoed, there's a mitzvah of eating in Sukkah. A requirement from a certain perspective of eating in Sukkah. Lulav and Esrog in the time of the Beis Hamikdash, it was biblically required, Chol Hamoed also. So how could, on one hand, Rashi say that melacha, that work, is prohibited biblically on Chol Hamoed, which means that whichever perspective you have, Chol Hamoed is a sign of the special relationship that exists between God and the Jewish people, because he holds work is prohibited, or even if he didn't hold that way, So the alternative is that the sign is the mitzvos of the day. And as far as the mitzvos of the day is concerned, Chol Hamoed certainly is associated with the mitzvos of the day biblically as well. So how are we to understand this opinion? Okay, he gives Mishnah Shako gives his own explanation. It's a very good explanation. And but I don't want to go into it now. I want to offer my own explanation that I offered many years ago, but my explanation could be used to explain also the opinion of the Mishnah Shako. We have a 7-day holiday like Pesach. We have an 8-day holiday, Sukkot. Okay, Shmini Atzeres to a certain degree is a separate holiday, and to a certain degree it's attached to Sukkot, so it's considered like Sukkot. According to some opinions, if somebody by mistake says Chag HaSukkos and Shmini Atzeres, he fulfills the mitzvah of davening because, in a certain respects, Shmini Atzeres is part of Sukkot, and in certain respects, it's an independent holiday. So the Sukkot holiday, with Shmini Atzeres attached to it, is an 8-day holiday. And Pesach is a 7-day holiday. And the first and last of those holidays have special status in comparison to the other days that are in between, in comparison to the Chol Hamoed that's in between. But there are two ways to understand this halacha. One way to understand this halacha is that if you have a holiday of 7, 8 days, automatically the first day and the last day assume special status. The beginning of the holiday and the end of the holiday assume special status because they're the beginning and the end of an extended holiday. Or we could say no. The Chol Hamoed has special status because it links the first day and the last day. In which case, the Chol Hamoed doesn't have special status in itself. And we find opinions, I think, on both sides, possibly. Now, in Europe, some had a custom, Hanukkah, of not lighting candles. I mean, during the candle, when the candles were lit, they didn't do work. And some people refrained from doing work. Some applied, some say just to women, they had that custom for whatever reason. And some say everybody. The Bach, in his parish on the tour, he says that there was a custom that on the first day of Hanukkah and on the last day of Hanukkah, not to do work. It was a hidden mitzvah. It's not a requirement. What type of work? He doesn't go into. That the person can evaluate that question. But the first day of Hanukkah and the last day, it was a custom. But it seemed to have been a very important custom. So much so that the Bach says that the words Hanukkah, which some interpret to mean Chanuch, they rested on the 25th. So most explain it. The Orzarua, for example, they explain that when it says Chanuch, Hanukkah, they rested on the 25th of Kislev, it means they rested from the war. There was a lull in the fighting They rested from the war. However, the Bach, he mentions that explanation and he pushes it aside. And the Bach says that when they celebrated Hanukkah, at least the first year, Chanu Chafei, they rested from doing work. And he says that's the reason why it's considered a special, a positive thing to refrain, according to the Maharil, to refrain from doing work on the first day of Hanukkah and on the 8th day of Hanukkah. Now, the question is, how do we understand it? So there are two possible explanations. One possible explanation is because on Hanukkah, one possible explanation is that Hanukkah is identified with Sukkot. In a number of ways, it's identified with Sukkot. But you see, according to the opinion of Beis Shammai, Beis Shammai Shita is that the candles are lit in descending order, not in accordance with our custom. The first day you light 8 candles, the second day 7 candles, the third day 6 candles, and so forth. That in that manner. So what's the reason? So one of the reasons given for Beis Shammai Shita is because on Sukkot, when they gave the korbanos, it was giving the number of bulls that were sacrificed, was giving in descending order. Each day, one bull less. So you see there's a special relationship. What's the special relationship? Because Hanukkah was the dedication of the Mizbeach, the dedication of the altar. And the new altar. And Sukkot was the holiday of the Mizbeach. Sukkot, they danced around the Mizbeach. Sukkot, they poured the water on the altar. It was a holiday of the altar. Consequently, the holiday of Sukkot, to a certain degree, and certainly according to the opinion of Beis Shammai, is a blueprint for the holiday. The holiday of Sukkot is a blueprint for the holiday of Hanukkah. So I think, and even according to Beis Hillel, we could say, and this would be the basis of that custom, since they're both holidays of the altar, so therefore, just like the first day of Sukkot is special and the 8th day is special, Yom Tov, so it's special. But there's another possible shot. No, that there's a general rule that whenever we have an extended holiday, we see from Sukkot and we see from Pesach, that whenever we have an extended holiday, the first day is special and the 8th day is special. Consequently, it was a hiddur mitzvah. It was considered extra piety, and it was accepted that Hanukkah in not today, but at one time, to refrain from doing work on the first day of Hanukkah and the last day of Hanukkah. Since it was an 8-day holiday, the first and 8th day have special significance, but have special significance. So so it seems if we take this second explanation, we could suggest that the opinion of the Bach and the Maharil is that the significant that it's the Chalamot is not just the linkage, but on the contrary, it's the fact that we have a 7 or 8 day holiday that makes the first day and the last day special. However, from the Ramban in Chumash, it appears that no, that that Chalamoid is a linkage. It's to connect the first day of the holiday with the last day of the holiday. Because the Ramban in Chumash says that what is the idea of Sfiras Omer? We count 7 weeks. He says Pesach, the first day of Pesach, is in a sense and is a holiday. And Shavuos, he says, is like the Shmini Atzeres. Shavuos is like the Shmini Atzeres of Pesach. So in other words, there are 2 approaches to Pesach. You could see Pesach on one hand. Pesach on one hand is a 7-day holiday. But then it's a 7-week holiday. It's a 7-week and 2-day holiday, because he says that the Sfiras Omer, the counting of the Omer, that we do between the first day of Pesach, starting on the 2nd day, and the day before Shavuos, which is the 49th day, that is the Chalamoed, he says, of Pesach, which links Pesach and Shavuos into one holiday. From one perspective, Shavuos and Pesach are 2 completely different holidays. But from another perspective, he says it's one holiday, and the Sfiras Omer is what links it. And it's interesting. There are those who say, they give other reasons are given, but this could be an additional reason, that a person should not do melacha, not do work, from the beginning of the evening, till he counts Sfira. Because it's called Shabboson. So the whole week is called Shabboson, which is identified with Shabbos, whatever it is. It's day refraining from Malacha. Now, in Sfira, it's the counting. It's not so much the days that link Pesach with Shavuos, but it's the counting. So from the beginning of the day until the counting, it's that period that is the linkage between Pesach and Shavuos. So, and that the Ramban says is like the Chalamoid that makes Pesach and Shavuos like one holiday, like Sukkot and Shmini Atzeres. Now, if we assume, like the Ramban, that Sukkot, that Chalamoid is a linkage, if we assume that Chalamoid is a linkage, so if we assume that Chalamoid is a linkage, so it comes out that Chalamoid, yes, Malacha might be usher, work might be prohibited, but it's and it has special status because work is prohibited. It has special status because of the mitzvos that it has. But the special status that it has comes from the Yomim Tovim with which it links. Because the purpose of Chalamoid is to link the first day of the holiday with the last day of the holiday. And if there hadn't been a reason to link it, we would have had one holiday and 7 or 8 days later another holiday with no Chalamoid in between. But because it was necessary to link the 2 days, so therefore there was given special significance to the Chalamoid. So if we say that, so to a large degree, it's only because, so we can understand why Rashi holds days that malach are prohibited, those that have mitzvos, because of themselves, not because of other days. That's considered a nos. That's considered to have a sign. But Chalamoid Work is prohibited. Chol Hamoed, they have special mitzvos. But the reason it has it is because it links the first day and the last day of the holiday. Since it's not because of itself, those days are not considered to be days that are a special sign of the relationship between God and the Jewish people. Consequently, according to Rashi, you have to put tefillin on. Yes, work is prohibited and biblically prohibited, but it's prohibited because it's the days, it's part of the days that link two other days. The first day of Yontif and the last day of Yontif. It's not because of the importance of the day itself. And we could say, so Chol Hamoed derives its special status from the Yom Tovim, and perhaps primarily because of the last day. In other words, to link the last day with the first day. So it would then follow that if Chol Hamoed gets its significance from the last day, if Chol Hamoed gets its significance from the last day, so things that, if there is a reason not to do certain things on the last day, which gives the significance to Chol Hamoed, then we certainly don't do it on Chol Hamoed, because the only reason we observe Chol Hamoed is because of the last day. So if on the last day of Pesach, we couldn't say Hol Halal because Ma'aseh Yadai Tovim Bayam, so we don't say Hol Halal during Chol Hamoed also. Now, what I want to suggest, and I want to speak a few words about my uncle, about the Rav. I think the concept of Mesora, of linkage, and Yontif represent, you have people that, in a certain sense, are like Chol Hamoed. They're the linkage. They link generations. And then you have people like Yontif that somehow have special status. And I think my uncle represented in a unique way, and perhaps in the most unique way of his generation, both of these type of individuals. There's certain people who give over Torah. And the way they give over Torah is they give over what they learned from previous generations. And that's part of the Mesora. Well, both are really part of the Mesora. It's a linkage. It's giving over. And there are some that will give a share, let's say, and they will say what their Rebbe said, what they heard, and what their Rebbe's Rebbe said. And they'll give over, and they might give it over in a very good fashion. But when they give it over, you're hearing it secondhand, you're hearing it third hand, you're hearing it fourth hand. The Rebbe isn't there. It's interesting on Pesach, in our Haggadah, the Rambam has a different girsa. We say, Lo es havasenu muvad gol HaKadosh Baruch Hu, el la'afo sonu gol imohem. The Ram's girsa, el la'afo sonu gol, doesn't say imohem. In other words, sometimes you can have a Mesora where they give over the Torah. We could be redeemed, or we can be redeemed together with them. We have a relationship with them. And I always wonder, when we say Pesach, Chayav Adam Liras Atzmos, we all come together, all the generations come together. I think our Nusach HaGod is emphasizing, not that the Rambam disagrees, in Hashkafa perspective, that the ultimate Mesora is not just giving over what you learned, but somehow, by virtue of the fact you can give over, you feel that you are together when the Torah of the former generations are given over by the teacher. You're not just getting it from the teacher. The teacher is able to provide an environment that he is your teacher. His teacher was your teacher. And the Dolim of previous generations, the Chachmei HaMesora, you're learning together with them. I think that's perhaps the idea in the Haggadah. Ma'asim Rabbi Lezer, Tafin, Rabbi Kiva, Rabbi Lezer ben Azariah, Shal Yimshubim b'nei Brak. We're not just at our Seder, we're not just joining the Jewish people, but we're with the Starim of all the generations. Gal imohem, with them. And there was no one who represented this idea of Mesora in this generation like my uncle. And when he was telling over, and he described, it's very famous, he described how he gives a share, but it wasn't just the Golan that he knew. He says when he gives a share, he invites, was his expression, the Rambam, he invites the Tanoim in, he invites the Rambam in, he invites the Ravid in, he invites the Rashba in to his classroom. He invites the Shach in. He invites Reb Chaim in. When he said over a piece of Torah of Reb Chaim, he wasn't just saying over what's in a book, in a sefer. He was saying it as Reb Chaim was saying it. And even for the Golan that he didn't know, Rishonim, the Rambam, he invites them in. He tries, he said, to create a conversation of generations. That's the concept of Mesora. Linkage. But the ultimate linkage is not just something of the past, but the linkage is that somehow it's Imahem. That through the linkage, it's Imahem. Afosanu Gal Imahem. But then, of course, my uncle was known, perhaps greater than anybody else in his generation, for his originality, for his creativity. That's the Yom Tov. That's the Yom Tov. And I don't know. I don't think we can become Yom Tovim. And certainly not in the manner that he was. But we should try to become linkages. To link. And you see, the truth is, my uncle's Torah, perhaps more than anybody else of this generation, this past generation, is learned now even more than he was alive. The linkage continues. And we have to make sure that we will continue to be a linkage in that generation of Mesora Satorah.
Shikoach or Moshe, any questions, please leave in the chat. Okay. Not seeing any questions. So, Shikoach, terrific job.
Okay.
So let me stop the recording. Okay.